Hello, this is Samuel Guy in Hawaii, and this is a look at the Beacon, a legendary Mali 1 pistol available only in the third Borderlands 3 DLC, Bounty of Blood. It's being compared to the Hellshock, and since I just did a video on the Hellshock, that's what we're doing. We're going to look at the Beacon in part by comparing it to the Hellshock. The Beacon can drop anywhere in the DLC, but can also be farmed from Jarek Logan on the Blood Sun Canyon map. There's a save point close by, as well as a fast travel station with vending machines. The fast travel and vending machine location, however, and the save point are separated by a very slow elevator. You might want to take the longer but potentially faster route from the zone gate if you're impatient and can move fast. Like Gigamine and the Hellshock, it's also a fairly fast and easy farm. Now, like the Hellshock, it's based on the Mali 1 blaster and shares many of the same parts. Unlike the Hellshock, with its bounce effect, the Beacon releases a Nova upon reload. More on that in a bit. The Beacon also comes in all element combinations, unlike the Hellshock, which is always fire and shock. The Beacon also does splash damage and can come in single and ×2 variants, although the latter consumes 2 ammo per shot. The Hellshocks are all ×2, but only consume 1 ammo per shot. Beacon also comes with a somewhat larger number of variable parts, resulting in more variants with a wider performance range. Now, aside from the standard barrel and body, neither of which show any listed performance modifiers, the Beacon comes with a combination of any 2 or all 3 barrel accessories, 3 possible magazines, each with its own accessory, 1 of 4 scopes or sights, 1 of 5 grips, and 1 of 5 hammers. Now, ignoring the sights, which don't affect listed stats, that's 300 possible part combinations versus the Hellshock 16. Add 10 possible elemental pairs, and that number jumps to 3,000. None of this includes anointments. Before we go into detail on performance, let's look at the Nova. The range is short, small diameter. This will not damage the entire map, but it's considered splash damage, so anything that increases splash damage radius will increase its range. It's still short though. The Nova also hits at the end of the reload cycle, after which the gun still has to recharge before firing. It is a Mali 1, but that recharge is pretty short. The Nova pattern is an outward expanding horizontal disc. It's flat. It only affects enemies at our level. Anything above or below the horizontal plane, like most phase grass enemies, it will not hit. Okay. Nova base damage is a percentage of the listed base damage per round consumed prior to reloading. When we reload, the game basically subtracts however many rounds are left in the magazine from the full magazine size and multiplies that number by percentage of the listed base damage. That percentage depends on the size of the magazine. For a listed 20 round magazine, it's 25% of the damage. For a listed 40 round magazine, it's 12.5%. Small mags do more damage than larger ones and create a larger percentage per Nova per round versus the larger magazines. The end result, however, for any variant is that completely emptying the magazine before reloading produces a Nova doing 500% of the listed base damage. If we fire the gun till empty before reloading, the Nova will do 500% of the listed base damage at a minimum, and letting the gun reload naturally is normally what we want to do. Now, because it's elemental splash damage, anything that increases splash damage or elemental damage will also increase Nova damage. Elemental annoyance on the gun or other gear will increase it or add additional elements.
Just stop!
Now, multiplicative V2 category damage boosts like personal space, however, will not. The Nova can also proc damage over time, and the dot is always the same size, regardless of the size of the Nova. It's the same size as the listed gun dot. The Nova dot, however, is counted separately from the gun, meaning it can stack on top of a gun dot. And percentage chance to proc dot for the Beacon ranges from 36%, which is better than 1 in 3 chance, to 48%, about a 50-50 chance. Now, at 8+ rounds per second and higher rates of fire, continuous fire will proc a dot on the primary and anyone hit by splash. and the Nova has a pretty good chance to dot as well. It's the same pretty much as the gun. So a beacon can conceivably dot not only the primary target, but anyone hit by the splash and anyone hit by the Nova. And the combined dots can do double the listed amount for the gun's elemental damage. Okay, as a percentage of total damage per second, that can be as little as 10% or as high as about 33%. A third of the damage we do to the primary target can come from damage over time. Okay, so the Nova mechanic is not just a nice to have extra. It may be something to structure our combat cycle around, or at least adjust our cycle and build to take advantage of. Joe's Dude's clone and drone build does just that. His video is linked below if you want to take a look at an example of how you do that. Okay, the gun itself, in any case, does plenty of damage without the Nova. Let's compare it directly to the Hellshock to get some idea of its effectiveness. This actually gets pretty interesting. Here are the pertinent stats. The winner of each category is listed in green. The far right percentage is how much better the winner is than the loser where appropriate. Hellshocks we can get anywhere. Beacon we only get from the DLC. You got to have the DLC. Baseline damage, the underlying damage figure, removing any modifiers to damage conveyed by specific parts, is actually higher on the Hellshock because it's always ×2. Hellshock is technically more ammo efficient. Beacon has a lot more variance than the Hellshock, but that's actually a negative. More variance means lower odds of getting what we want when farming or whenever we find one. Most people don't think about that. Their special abilities are very different. The Beacon Nova tends to be more of a close-end mobbing weapon. The Hellshock bounce more single target. Two different uses, difficult to compare. Now, however, we get to the more important differences. The Beacon comes in all element pairs, an obvious plus over the Hellshock, which is limited to fire shock. Beacon wins out on max listed damage, but also loses on the low end. That's those 300 versus 16 variants at work again. Base damage wise, it's a lot easier to find a top damage Hellshock, 1 in chance in 16, than a Beacon, 1 in 300, but that's base damage. A better indicator of performance beyond listed damage is damage per second, or DPS. DPS figures in damage, rate of fire, magazine size, and reload speed to determine how much damage we do per second with continuous fire, assuming we hit with all rounds. Accuracy and handling don't really factor in since both guns are based on the same Model 1 blaster and have a similar or identical parts. From a straight DPS standpoint, Hellshock wins. The lowest Hellshock DPS numbers are actually higher than the top performing Beacon. DPS figures for both guns, by the way, factor in the recharge delay before firing resumes after reloading. If you saw the Hellshock video, you know what I'm talking about. Beacon has a higher max elemental damage figure, but also a lower end than the Hellshock. This is damage over time, or dot. Again, larger number of variants. Elemental damage is a percentage of base damage, and these are both Model 1 pistols, so they use the same percentage. Both guns scale elemental damage off of base damage the same way. What's DPS plus elemental damage? Well, both Hellshocks and Beacons are fast-firing weapons with fairly high percentage chance to proc damage over time. In both cases, we are going to proc a dot very quickly, so it's reasonable to add damage over time, the listed elemental damage per second, to our damage per second figures and compare those numbers. When we do that, Hellshock still wins. Even the lower Hellshock figure is fairly close to the Beacon high. So from a numbers standpoint, especially the important numbers, the Hellshock seems to be winning. But we're not finished. Okay, the Beacon has splash damage, Nova damage, and Nova dot damage. Okay, Hellshock has none of those. And we discussed earlier how those three can add to damage to primary and nearby targets. These three, however, are hard to quantify. They depend on the number and proximity of additional enemies or hitboxes on really large enemies, and also how we use the weapon. So which is the better gun? Well, the answer is we're asking the wrong question. What we have here are two similar but still fairly different weapons with their own strong points. If we have room and use for both, I carry examples of both. We should not think of one as better than the other. Single target wise, if fire and shock is all we need, go with the Hellshock. From a mobbing standpoint or any situation where we need something else besides fire and shock though, Beacon is probably preferable, especially if we're operating very closely. We can maximize the Nova mechanic. The Beacon can be pretty amazing. And one last reminder about how much harder it is to get the right Beacon. 16 Hellshocks variant versus 3,000 Beacons means that however long it takes to get the right Hellshock with the right anointment, it will take us, on average, 187 times longer to do the same with the Beacon. Okay, or not. RNG is a fickle thing. We might get what we want on the very first try. Anyway, comparisons aside, what's the best beacon? How good is the particular beacon we just obtained? Well, that's hard to say because, like the clairvoyance, there's no set list of parts that consistently provide the best performance. And like the clairvoyance, I'm not going to try and tell you. Instead, like the clairvoyance, I'm going to post the following to Google Docs. This is a spreadsheet. Okay. On one side, we have the same summary table I showed you earlier. And on the other side, I've got the spreadsheet with all the main stats for all 300 possible variants, not counting elemental pairs. Okay. 319 because we started out at 20. We might be missing one somewhere. Anyway, so what's going on here is these columns right here are your 6 main stats on the weapon stat card. I haven't bothered with accuracy and handling because I don't yet fully understand the math, but those don't figure into DPS, so we can ignore them. This is damage. This is a ×2 multiplier if your gun is that way. This is reload time, fire rate, magazine size. Okay, these 3 are your elemental stats: elemental damage, cryo efficiency if your gun has cryo, and elemental percentage chance. These last 2 columns are white text you should see on your gun, down the white text area. Okay, weapon charge speed bonus and splash damage radius bonus. Okay, now I've sorted everything from left to right, starting with damage. So what you do is you find your gun's damage, or a group of guns with that damage. In other words, if yours is 19,286, you've got a bunch of them. Okay, and then move over and find your reload time, your rate of fire, your magazine size. If it hasn't narrowed it down, keep going to elemental damage, cryo efficiency, elemental chance, and then if you have to, check out, splash damage radius. Find the one that matches your gun. Okay, this over here is adjusted DPS. This is DPS with elemental damage, and this over here is the ranking of this number down here. Okay, this number here is ranked over here from 1 to 300. So if this is your gun, out of 300 guns, this one is number 17 in terms of DPS and elemental damage output. Okay, the best is number 1, the worst is 300. Now, as I mentioned in the clairvoyance video, but not in the Hellshock video, some of these numbers, especially these and these here, may not match the stat cards exactly. This is because the numbers on the actual stat cards rarely, if ever, match or reflect the underlying numbers in the game. Okay, in the game code. They are almost always rounded off, and I have to use those rounded off numbers in my calculations. The differences, however, should be minor, never more than 0.1 or 0.01%. So if my figure says 151701, your card says 15694, you're in the right place. Basically, your number is only going to match up to really closely to one of these numbers, so that shouldn't be an issue. Now, there are a number of other columns you may choose to sort, and there are also a lot of hidden columns and rows showing various calculations and my underlying math. To do any of that, you have to unlock the spreadsheet, which you can do. There's no password. If you really want to sort on other columns, though, or look at the underlying data, you are more than welcome to do so. Just let me know if you find any mistakes. And that's it for what is unquestionably the best Model 1 pistol in the game, and currently one of the best pistols, period, except for one minor note. Okay, in the Hellshock video, I pointed out apparent inconsistencies in some weapon stats given parts. Damage rate figures, rates of fire, and weapon charge speed bonuses for some Hellshocks were not what they should be given their parts. The vast majority were about 10% higher than they should be. This is not something anyone would notice without doing this kind of analysis. This also appears to be the case with the beacon, meaning it may be specific to Mali 1 pistols in general. The only way to tell, though, is to do analysis on other Mali 1 pistols, and I'm not that curious at the moment. Is it anything to worry about? Well, 10%, while significant, is not a huge margin, and it doesn't affect all guns. I've been noticing this sort of thing roughly 40% of the time. If this is a bug and Gearbox decides to fix it, performance will drop on some guns by about 10%. We may or may not even notice that. Whatever is going on, however, they could decide to leave it alone, in which case there are two possibilities. One, there are unlisted modifiers in play, which would kind of be upsetting because it makes listing and looking at parts and doing the math kind of pointless. Okay, I don't think that's what it is. The other possibility is that somewhere in the underlying calculations my math sucks. If so, I can accept that, although the odds of getting the same results with two different weapons are probably pretty low. Okay. In any case, this is not something anyone else is likely to notice, so I sent a ticket to Gearbox about the Hellshock. Yet to hear back. I may do another one on the Beacon. In any case, I will keep an eye out for patch notes or unannounced fixes. I check some of these weapons for changes every Thursday, and I will let you all know if things change. And as always, likes and or comments are welcome below. Consider subscribing if you'd like to see more of this content. I've also started streaming a few times a week on Twitch. The channel with its schedule is linked below if you'd like to drop by and ask questions. Thanks for watching.